Imperial Japan was known for its brutality. The citizens of Nanking knew this firsthand. December 13th, 1937, the Japanese Imperial Army invaded China's capital at the time, Nanking, and subjected its citizens to 6 weeks of trauma and hopelessness. Yet, before all hope was lost, a beacon of hope shined through the haze of war. His name was John Rabe, a German Nazi who stood up to total war and began the Nanking Safety Zone. He and other members of the International Committee for the Nanking Safety Zone saved up to 250,000 lives. Those 6 weeks are now known as the Rape of Nanking. This was also known as the Nanking Massacre. Although it is hard to believe, war once constituted two groups of 30 or so men lining up on a grassy hill before firing their muskets at each other. They fought each other's armies, not each other's countries. Nowadays, the war we practice is total war, meaning that when two nations go to war, it isn't a war of armies. It's a war of the whole country. Armies attacking the society that started the government, the producer that supplies the bullets, and the sector that controls foreign affairs. No longer does war only kill soldiers, but also civilians. Total war often involves the intentional slaughter of innocent people, either directly or through siege. This is clearly shown in the Nanking Massacre. Over a third of all buildings were destroyed, and the citizens were often subject to intense sexual assault. John Rabe was a German businessman affiliated with the Nazi Party who worked for Simons. He was stationed in Nanjing at the time of Japan's occupation. Rabe wrote countless journal entries regarding the Japanese atrocities, saying that corpses littered the streets. He even sent a letter to Hitler regarding the immense cruelty happening in the city and pleading for ceasefire, which later served as a determining factor in his arrest when he returned to Germany. John Rabe was a strong supporter of the German Nazi Party, which makes his story saving Nanjing the dictionary definition of a paradox, as he is remembered today as a humanitarian and a hero. His loyalty for his party prevailed, as he often wore the swastika to confront Japanese soldiers for misconduct, as well as placed the Nazi flag on his car and house. His status as an influential member of the Nazi Party gained him influence, aiding him in his path. John Rabe spent vast amounts of time negotiating with the Japanese Imperial Army to keep the Nanking Safety Zone away from marauding soldiers. The zone was constantly being accused of sheltering Chinese soldiers, even though only civilians were permitted. He wrote, "Their only hope is that I, the, quote, foreign devil, will drive these evil spirits away." Eventually, the Japanese unofficially agreed to keep fighting out of the areas clear of Chinese troops. After much persuasion to the Chinese government, Rabe effectively cleared the safety zone of militia. The massacre affected the citizens as much, dare say more, than the soldiers. They were deprived of basic human rights and had resources such as food, water, and shelter taken from them. The practices of total war were especially hard on the children. It was not uncommon to see malnourished orphans on the street, homes destroyed by the bombs that rained from the sky, and parents killed by the Japanese soldiers. John McGee, an American missionary who stayed behind in Nanking and shot hundreds of minutes of films during the Nanking Massacre. Later, after World War II ended, he testified for the International Military Tribunals of the Far East, otherwise known as the Tokyo Trials.
The killing began immediately in several ways, often by individual Japanese soldiers, or up to 30 soldiers together going about, each one seeming to have the power of life or death. And then soon there was organized killing of great bodies of men.
Wen Shunqi, a survivor of the Nanking Massacre, describes how her and several other women were taken away by Japanese troops. She said that she was led into a room, then threatened by a soldier with a knife, before being raped. After that, she was forced to stay in a cellar until she was deemed peaceful by the Japanese soldiers. She also recounts how her elderly neighbor was brutally murdered, stomach slashed open. The Japanese's crimes were nothing short of horrific and downright inhumane. On estimation, more than 1,000 cases of rape occurred every night. John Rabe worked tirelessly. He even used his own property as shelter. The upkeep of the immense amount of resources consumed took lots of time from both him and the rest of the International Committee for the Nanking Safety Zone. They had to transport convoys of food sent by the government through battlefields without being raided, and had to provide shelter and heating for the hundreds of thousands who resided on the safety zone. Everyone who wasn't in the safety zone was almost guaranteed death. By working almost non-stop, he and the committee were able to keep hundreds of thousands out of the clutches of total war. There are innumerable records of Japanese soldiers having contests of who would rape and kill the most Chinese. There are even more cases of Japanese soldiers raping, torturing, and killing Chinese soldiers and civilians simply because they hesitated when handing over a cigarette or just for the fun of it. John Rabe recorded an incident where a Japanese soldier had tortured and killed a pregnant woman before stabbing her in the abdomen, fetus and intestines spilling out. They forced the Chinese prisoners to watch as they disemboweled the liver and heart before roasting it on a spit and eating it. Girls, not even adults, were raped as many times as 7 daily and sometimes by multiple men. Thousands of Chinese were killed by way of bayonet, landmine, petrol, and fire, individually taking up to an hour. A girl, 14 years old, was raped by 3 men. Her 2- and 4-year-old neighbors were murdered. A 16-year-old girl was raped to death.
The International Committee in the Nanking Safety Zone served to be hope in a time of hopelessness. For the people of Nanjing in a time of fear and wreckage, their actions were nothing short of heroic. And it is clear that in the end, John Rabe's story isn't the story of a miracle. It's the story of a man who worked tirelessly to stand up for his beliefs that he found to be true and just.